Chapter 3, Mishnah 1. Under biblical law, a person can become Tamei only through contact with an Avatuma. If he comes into contact with the Rishon Latuma, and certainly if he comes into contact with the Sheni Latuma, he does not become Tamei at all. However, the rabbis decree that if a person touches a Rishon Latuma with his hands, they become Tamei as a Sheni Latuma. As a Sheni Latuma, they can transmit Tuma to Teruma and Kadoshim, but not to Chulin foods. There are certain exceptional cases in which a person does not become Tamei even through contact with an Avatuma. One such case is where only a part of one's body entered a Beit Hamenuga, afflicted house, i.e. a house affected with saras. See Vayikra chapter 14, verses 33 through 53. An afflicted house is an Avatuma. Someone who enters an afflicted house becomes Tamei as a Rishon Latuma. However, this is only if his entire body entered the afflicted house. If only a part of his body entered, he does not become Tamei. Nevertheless, the rabbis decree that if one put his hands into the airspace of an afflicted house, his hands, though not the rest of his body, do become Tamei. See Chulin 33b. But what degree of Tuma did the rabbis decree on this person's hands? Did they give the hands the same Sheni Latuma status as hands that touched the Rishon Latuma, or did they give them the status of a Rishon Latuma? This is the question the first part of our Mishnah discusses, and we now turn to the words of the Mishnah. If someone places his hands into a house that is afflicted with saras, which is an avatuma, his hands become Tamei to the degree of a beginning level of Tuma. That is, they become a Rishon Latuma, just like a person who enters the house becomes a Rishon Latuma. These are the words of Rabbi Akiva. The sages dispute Rabbi Akiva's ruling, but the sages say his hands are Tamei only as a Sheni Latuma. Before explaining the sages' reasoning, the Mishnah records another case where they argue with Rabbi Akiva regarding hands that touch an avatuma. This case concerns the law known as Tuma Bechiburin, Tuma while in contact. Usually, when a person becomes Tamei from an avatuma, he does not transmit Tuma to people or utensils that he touches. This is because he is a Rishon Latuma, and people and utensils can become Tamei only through contact with an avatuma. However, there are certain types of avatuma, for example, the saliva of a zav, see Vayikra chapter 15, verse 8, that make a person Tamei, to the extent that not only does he become Tamei, but as long as he is in contact with the avatuma, he also transmits Tuma to the clothes he is wearing and the utensils he is touching, making them a Rishon Latuma as well. See Kalayim chapter 1, Mishnahs 2 and 3, and Zavim chapter 5, Mishnahs 6 through 8. In effect, as long as he is in contact with the avatuma, the person himself is considered an avatuma with regard to clothing and utensils. However, even while in contact with the avatuma, he does not transmit Tuma to people that he touches. See Zavim, chapter 5, Mishnah 1. And we now return to the words of the Mishnah. Anyone who transmits Tuma to the clothes he is wearing and utensils he is touching at the time he is in contact with an avatuma, transmits Tuma to the hands that touch him during that time, making them a beginning, i.e. Rishon level of Tuma. Just like the clothing and utensils he is touching, then are Tamei as a Rishon Latuma. These are the words of Rabbi Akiva. But the sages say he makes the hands become only Sheni Latuma. The sages explain why in the Mishnah's two cases they rule that the hands are Sheni Latuma. The sages said to Rabbi Akiva, where do we find anywhere that hands are Tamei at the beginning level of Tuma? In all other cases of Tumas Yadayim, the rabbis gave hands the Tuma status of Sheni Latuma. It stands to reason that in these exceptional cases too, the rabbis decreed that the hands are Sheni Latuma. Rabbi Akiva responds to the sages' argument. Rabbi Akiva said to the sages, but how is it ever possible for hands to be a beginning level of Tuma unless the person's entire body became Tamei, except for these two cases in the Mishnah? The reason we do not find any cases of hands becoming Tamei as a Rishon Latuma is that usually, when someone touches an avatuma with his hands, his entire body becomes Tamei. It is only when he touches a Rishon Latuma that his hands, but not his entire body, become Tamei, and since he touched a Rishon Latuma, his hands become only a Sheni Latuma. However, in cases where one's entire body does not become Tamei, when his hands touch an Av, such as the case in our Mishnah, the person's hands are in fact a Rishon Latuma. The first half of the Mishnah discussed the status of hands that touched an avatuma. The second half of the Mishnah discusses the status of hands that touch the Sheni Latuma. Food and utensils that become Tamei as a Sheni Latuma by coming into contact with Tamei liquid, which is a Rishon Latuma, transmit Tuma to hands that touch them, making them a Sheni Latuma. These are the words of Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Yeshua maintains that the rabbis decreed a Sheni degree of tuma not only on hands that touch a rishon latuma, but also on hands that touch the sheni latuma. A dissenting opinion, but the sages say something that became tame by coming into contact with an avatuma, in other words, something that is a rishon latuma, transmits tuma to the hands that touch it. But something that became tame by coming into contact with derived tuma, i.e., a rishon latuma, in other words, something that is a sheni latuma, does not transmit tuma to the hands that touch it. The Mishnah cites an incident that supports the sages' ruling. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel said, "There was an incident with a certain woman who came before my father Rabban Gamliel. She told him, 'My hands entered the airspace of a tame earthenware utensil, which transmits tuma through its airspace. Are my hands tame as a result?' My father said to her, 'My daughter, what was the source of the utensil's tuma? Did it become tame through contact with an avatuma, in which case it was a rishon latuma, or did it become tame through contact with derived tuma, in which case it is only sheni latuma?' But I did not hear what she answered my father, nor how my father ruled." The sages said, "The matter is clear. We see from this incident that something that became tame by coming into contact with an avatuma transmits tuma to the hands that touch it. But something that became tame by coming into contact with derived tuma does not transmit tuma to the hands that touch it. For even if something that became tame through derived tuma transmits tuma to hands, Rabban Gamliel would not have had to ask the woman how the earthenware vessel became tame."